Joining us now, Jake Sherman, MS Now political contributor, co-founder of Punchbowl News, and Mark McKinnon is also back with us. Jake, what do congressional Republicans want to hear from the president when it comes to affordability?
I don't know that they want to hear anything specific. I mean, I think the problem is that the one big beautiful bill, which passed now, I mean, we're in December, right? This thing was signed into law 5 months ago. And what the Speaker Mike Johnson, said last week is that everyone should relax and we'll see some of the benefits of it kick in at the beginning of the year. If you are a Republican running for re-election in any district that could be seen as vulnerable or competitive, then that's not a great message to hear. I mean, this bill is the Republicans' one massive achievement of this Congress. Whether you like the policy or not, they set out to do it. They were able to do it. They don't want to hear that, things are going to get better, or don't believe what you see at the supermarket, or don't believe your bills. That's not of interest to many Republicans. And listen, the challenge is that when President Trump goes to a rally or an event like this, is that he doesn't really actually talk about the underlying issue, which is touting, theoretically at least, touting the legislation that Congress passed. He gets into side issues, gripes he has, problems he has with certain members of Congress, or stories from his past. I mean, we've been hearing that since 2016. It's 2024. So I think what they want to hear is they want to hear some vision for the future, I guess. They want to hear that he's going to do more to get prices under control, to get the economy, up and running again, or up and running better again. I think that's what people are looking for. And people are looking for, I mean, we're only 1 year into this Congress. We're not even at the end of the first year of the Trump presidency. I think people want to know what he's doing next. What should Congress be? How is Congress going to head into this election year in which Democrats are favored with some sort of agenda that will get people reelected?
Perhaps new year, new you. We'll see. We've seen, Mark, how voters respond to "don't believe your lying eyes." They don't like it. They don't like to be told that what they see isn't real. So Trump had a lot of success in blaming Biden for high prices and inflation, but according to a new Politico poll, 46% of Americans say that the cost of living is the worst that they can even remember, and the same number, 46%, say it's Trump's fault. Is there anything that the president can do at this point to reverse course, or is it too late?
Well, there's a couple things he can do. One is quit saying that it's a hoax. I mean, you can say the Russia investigation is a hoax. You can say the Epstein investigation is a hoax. But you try and tell people that the economic pain that they're feeling is a hoax, and they're saying, well, wait a minute, it's not a hoax to me. I mean, Bill Clinton famously said when he had economic problems, I feel your pain. And the problem is Donald Trump is telling them that their pain is not real. That's the first problem. The second problem is he's trying to blame Biden a year in. The statute of limitations has run out. And beyond that, it's really clear to everybody that the primary economic tool that Trump has implemented, which is tariffs, is responsible for what's going on. So, and the third thing is, which Jake referred to, is you can't just say, well, wait till next year. Things are going to get better sometime down the road. People want action and they want it now. That's what they want to hear.
So, Jake, Puck News is reporting that there will be an exodus of House Republicans in the coming weeks. We also know that Speaker Mike Johnson's facing a lot of internal pressure, essentially what amounts to what could be a revolt at some point. Do you think that these are all signs of a larger mutiny going on in the party, or at least amid some of the party?
I think that there are a lot of people who are going to retire. I think that's in some cases natural, but in this case specifically, I think it's a commentary about how much it sucks to be a member of Congress, especially a member of Congress in a party that is likely to lose the majority in 2026. That's not a big jump. That's not a leap of faith. The fact is, the party in power usually loses the majority in the midterm of the president's term. Now, you could look at this Congress and say, you could make that, everyone watching can make the judgment. Do you think that this Congress and its performance has warranted a break from that history. That's what voters will be deciding. I don't know that a lot of members of Congress think that. And I think, listen, this place has gotten significantly worse over the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, we have a ton of censures on the floor. Congress has not been able to pass much. I mean, again, the one achievement, the central achievement of this majority was signed into law July 3rd. Since then, or July 4th, I guess, since then, we have not seen Congress really been able to get back into the swing of things, back into the groove. So I think it does speak to a larger dynamic about what people feel about Republican control right now, especially with Donald Trump in the White House.